Nothing about that Sunday felt like a Sunday that was going to change everything. That's what I keep returning to. Not one thing felt off until it was completely, irreversibly off. My name is Leonard Parrish, 71 years old, 40 years as a licensed civil engineer in this state. Memphis born, Memphis built, and fully at peace with both of those facts. I live in a Craftsman on Avondale Park Road in East Memphis, a house I have owned for 22 years, and I live there alone now, which suits me fine. I am a man of routine and order and comfortable silences, and I had no enemies, no disputes, no unresolved grievances with the world. What I had, going into that Sunday in October, was an invitation to dinner. That is all it was, a Sunday roast with family, or so I believed. Welcome to Dad's True Emotions. Hit that like button, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and make sure you're subscribed. This one goes somewhere. Let's get into it. My son Derek called me the Wednesday before. I was on the back porch with my morning coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up, when my phone buzzed on the armrest. Dad's Sunday dinner. Vanessa's been cooking since Tuesday practically. You coming? Define cooking since Tuesday, I said. He laughed. She's doing a full pot roast. The one with the red wine reduction you had at Christmas that you asked about twice. Said you should come early enough to sit on the porch before it gets dark. That detail, the porch and the early arrival, that's what got me. Derek knows I like evenings on a porch. He'd remembered it and worked it into the invitation. I felt, in that moment, genuinely looked after. Who else is coming? Just us, he said. Marcus might stop by. He's been crashing here the past few weeks while his lease situation sorts itself out. Nothing big, just family. My brother Marcus, 61 years old, recently separated from his wife of 22 years. I knew he had been going through something difficult. Derek letting him stay made sense. That's the kind of household Derek ran, or so I believed. What time? I asked. 4 o'clock, come hungry. I'll bring pie, I said. He sounded pleased. I hung up and spent exactly no time worrying about it. I was looking forward to it. I want to be clear about that going in because what followed was not something I had any premonition about. I walked into that Sunday with nothing but goodwill. Sunday morning I woke at 6, made coffee, read for a while. Drove out to my favorite bakery on Poplar Avenue and picked up a pecan pie, the good kind, the one with the dark cane syrup and the buttered crust. I arrived at Derek's house on Germantown Road at 4:15, carrying the pie and feeling like the evening ahead of me was exactly what Sunday evenings were meant to be. Vanessa answered the door before I knocked. She was in an apron, hair back, and she pulled me into a hug that lasted slightly longer than usual, warm and firm. Vanessa had always been an affectionate person, so I registered it and let it go. Leonard, you look wonderful. Come in. Give me that pie. Derek appeared from the living room. My son, 43 years old, tall, built like the athlete he was in college. He shook my hand and pulled me into the half embrace that men in our family have done since I can remember. Dad, glad you came. You want something to drink? Marcus was on the couch with a glass of bourbon, watching a pregame broadcast. He raised his glass when I walked in. Leonard, looking sharp. I settled into the armchair across from him and we watched the pregame together for a while in that easy, comfortable silence that has always been the language between my brother and me. The house smelled extraordinary. Red wine and herbs and something sweet from the oven. Vanessa had clearly put real effort into this meal. I felt comfortable. I felt at home. About 20 minutes before she called us to the table, Derek came in from the kitchen holding a small, dark bottle. Slim label, minimal design, the kind of packaging that signals premium without explaining itself. Hey Dad, before I forget. He held it out. I've been seeing this wellness consultant with Vanessa. She put us on to this mineral restoration supplement, all natural. She says people our age, especially men, walk around depleted and don't realize how much it affects clarity and energy. She swears by it. I looked at the bottle. I looked at my son. Derek, I take what my physician recommends. That's my position on supplements. Dad, it's not a medication. It's a mineral compound, like a multivitamin but more targeted. He sat on the arm of the couch. Look, you mentioned back in September on the phone that you'd been tired, running down in the afternoons. He looked at me. You mentioned it twice, actually. I had mentioned it. A passing comment during one of our regular calls about feeling run down after a long stretch of project reviews. He'd remembered it. He'd filed it away and gone out and found something for it. In that moment, I felt the thing you feel when your child pays attention to you, a particular warmth that I'm not sure language fully covers. It's a few drops in water, he continued. Vanessa takes it every day. I've been on it 3 weeks. I'm sleeping better, just try it. I examined the bottle. The label listed mineral compounds, plant extracts, distilled water, nothing that looked remotely concerning. What do I do? Just a few drops in a drink. Vanessa appeared in the doorway then, already holding a glass of water. I already poured yours, Leonard. She smiled. You honestly won't taste a difference. Derek measured the drops himself. I watched him count them carefully, 12 of them. He was deliberate about it, the way you're deliberate about something you want to get exactly right. He handed the glass to Vanessa, who set it in my hand with a smile. Cheers, Dad. Cheers, I said, and I drank it. Dinner was everything the invitation had promised. The pot roast was exceptional, braised low and slow with red wine and root vegetables until the meat came apart at the touch. Roasted potatoes with rosemary, green beans with toasted almonds, the kind of meal that tells you someone spent real time caring about it. Marcus poured wine. Derek was relaxed and warm. Vanessa moved between the kitchen and the table with the ease of a woman entirely comfortable in her own home. I was happy, right up until the point when I wasn't. It arrived without warning, somewhere between the second helping of potatoes and reaching for the bread basket. My mouth went dry. Not gradually, abruptly, like something had been switched off. I reached for my water glass and noticed with a distant, confused quality that my hand felt slightly removed from my intentions. A faint metallic taste moved across the back of my tongue. Something had shifted in my equilibrium by a fraction, the way a level reads when a surface isn't quite right even though it looks flat from where you're standing. I thought I was getting sick. I genuinely, completely thought I was coming down with something. 71 years old. The body sends notices without explanation sometimes. You all right, Dad? Derek's voice from across the table. Fine, just a little warm, I smiled. Vanessa, this pot roast is exceptional. She beamed. I kept eating, kept talking, kept moving through the dinner, but the metallic taste didn't pass the way a head rush passes, and the subtle wrongness in my equilibrium didn't lift. It quietly settled in. I excused myself for a moment, said I was going to get some water from the kitchen. Vanessa started to rise. I waved her back down. I know where the kitchen is. The kitchen was quiet and cool after the warmth of the dining room. I filled a glass at the sink and stood there drinking it slowly, waiting. The metallic taste persisted. I set the glass on the counter and my hand, still not entirely reliable, nudged the dish towel off the edge. It slipped down behind the trash can into the narrow gap between the cabinet base and the bin. I crouched to retrieve it. And I saw the packaging. It was wedged in the shadow of that gap, crumpled, pushed back just far enough that you would never see it standing upright. A torn piece of foil blister packaging with the blocky clinical lettering that belongs to prescription medication. Not a kitchen, not a wellness supplement, a prescription. Someone in this house is managing something they haven't told me about. That was my first thought, my only thought. The instinct of a father and an older brother wondering which family member was dealing with something privately. I picked it up and turned it over. Hyoscine scopolamine. I didn't know what it was. I want to be completely clear about that. I had never heard the name. I pulled out my phone at the kitchen sink and typed it into the search bar. The results loaded. I read the first entry. Then I read it again. Hyoscine, anticholinergic agent, contraindicated in elderly patients. Known effects include acute disorientation, short-term memory impairment, episodes of confusion that may present as cognitive decline or early dementia. The kitchen tap was still running. From the dining room, I could hear Marcus telling a story, his voice easy and comfortable and completely ordinary. Cognitive decline, confusion presenting as dementia, 12 drops carefully counted into a glass already prepared. I turned off the tap. I folded the packaging and put it in the breast pocket of my jacket. I picked up my water glass. I walked back to that table and I sat down and I smiled at my family and I said nothing because I did not know yet. Not for certain, but something had changed in that kitchen that I could not change back. Before I left that evening, Derek pressed 2 sealed bottles of the supplement into my hands at the door. Take one every morning, Dad. You'll feel the difference inside a week. I looked at my son's face. Open, warm, smiling with what looked completely like love. I searched it the way an engineer looks at a structure for the flaw he is praying isn't there. I will, I said. Thank you, Derek. I walked to my car and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe someone in that house has a legitimate prescription, and the packaging ended up there by accident. Maybe I'm a tired old man who read some terrifying words on a phone screen at a kitchen sink and ran too far with them. I drove home to Avondale Park Road. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at that blister pack for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. If you've been with us for a while, subscribe to Dad's True Emotions right now. Hit that like button. Drop a comment. Now back to it. My daughter Renata lives in Nashville, 37 years old. She has worked as a healthcare compliance attorney for 8 years and has a mind like a precision instrument. She and Derek have not been close since a dispute 4 years ago over property from my mother's estate, a conflict I had largely attributed to normal sibling friction and had not examined as carefully as I should have. Renata had never asked me to take sides. She had simply and quietly kept her relationship with me separate from her relationship with her brother, and had never once made me feel the tension of that. Calling her at 11 at night felt like crossing something. I crossed it. She picked up on the second ring. Dad, her voice immediately alert. It's almost midnight. What's wrong? I need you to listen to me without interrupting until I finish. Can you do that? A beat, yes. I told her everything. Derek's call on Wednesday, the invitation, the supplement, Derek counting 12 drops into a glass Vanessa had already prepared, the way it hit me at the table, the dry mouth, the metallic taste, the subtle wrongness in my equilibrium, the napkin falling, the gap between the cabinet and the bin, the blister pack, what I read on my phone with the tap running, the 2 sealed bottles pressed into my hands at the door with a warm smile. When I finished, the line was quiet for long enough that I checked the screen. I'm here, she said. Her voice had changed. The midnight alertness had shifted into something else, a stillness I recognized even through the phone. The gear change. Don't touch those bottles. They're factory sealed, both of them. Good, she was already moving. I could hear it. The blister pack, you have it. Right here in front of me on the table. Put it in a sealed bag. Don't handle it more than you have to. I need you to overnight everything to me tomorrow morning. FedEx, not USPS. Pay cash. And Dad, don't put your name on the return address. That last instruction. Don't put your name on the return address. That wasn't a daughter being careful. That was an attorney treating what was on my kitchen table as evidence. What are you thinking? I asked. I'm thinking I need to know what's actually in those bottles before either of us says another word, she said. Can you do what I'm asking? Yes. Get some sleep. I'll call you at 7. She called at 6:48. The results came back, she said, without greeting or preamble. Both sealed bottles. The independent toxicology lab I use for professional matters ran a full analysis. Dad, they're laced with scopolamine, concentrated significantly above any therapeutic threshold. The toxicologist's written report describes the finding as consistent with intentional administration. The kitchen was very still. Outside on Avondale Park Road, a car moved past. Completely ordinary sound on a completely ordinary Tuesday morning. How concentrated? I asked, because I am an engineer and I needed the number even though the number was going to cost me something I could not get back. Concentrated enough that taken daily as instructed, the cumulative effect on a man your age would produce rapid, escalating cognitive symptoms, memory gaps, repeated disorientation, confusion severe enough that anyone observing you over the following 3 to 4 weeks would have a compelling documented record of serious cognitive decline. Short sentences. My brain had stopped processing longer ones. They needed me to look like I was losing my mind. Medical and behavioral documentation, Renata confirmed. Witnessed episodes. And Dad, I ran a check on your property and estate records at Shelby County. Someone pulled a full asset valuation and title search on your Avondale house and your investment portfolio in late August. The request came through a law firm I've encountered before. They specialize in what is called predatory conservatorship. They identify high-net-worth elderly individuals, coach family members on building a behavioral record of decline, and file a preemptive petition with the probate court. The moment you fail a cognitive evaluation or have a documented episode, the court strips you of the legal right to manage your own affairs, everything under your son's control. My portfolio, my property, 31 years of disciplined, quiet building. Conservative estimate, Renata said, north of 3.8 million. I sat at the kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast alone 1,000 mornings. I felt something happen inside my chest that I have no precise name for. It was not rage. Rage is fast and hot. This was cold. This was structural. The feeling of watching a load-bearing calculation fail in slow motion and knowing with complete clarity exactly what it means. Marcus, I said, it wasn't a question. Marcus is listed as a supporting signatory on the petition, she said. He moved into Derek's house in September, 2 months before Thanksgiving. I thought about my brother on that couch, the bourbon, the easy conversation, the comfortable way he had settled into that house like he'd been there for years. He's in financial trouble, I said. That's my read. His signature on that petition isn't a confused man making a bad call. That's a transaction. I closed my eyes. The full picture assembled itself with a sickening, mechanical precision. Marcus hadn't fallen on hard times and landed at his nephew's door. He had arrived with something to offer in exchange for relief, and Derek had taken it. My son had built a corporate takeover of his father's mind, with his uncle's signature as validation and a law firm's architecture as the blueprint. "Are you all right, Dad?" Renata asked. "I will be," I said. "What do we do?" "We do this exactly right," she said. "No calls to Derek. No changes to your behavior. Total surface normalcy. Nothing that signals anything has changed on your end." "Understood." "First move. I'm scheduling you with a neurological assessment specialist here in Nashville. Court-admissible cognitive evaluation. I've already contacted the office. We get you evaluated clean and on record before any petition gets filed. That document becomes the foundation of everything." She'd already made the call before she delivered the results. When I asked, "Thursday? I'm driving up Wednesday." She arrived at Avondale Park Road at 7:30 Wednesday evening. I watched from the front window as a gray Lexus with Tennessee plates parked cleanly on the street. She stepped out in a dark coat, leather bag over one shoulder, moving with the complete certainty of someone who has never been unsure where they were going. I opened the door before she reached the steps. We stood in the doorway for a moment with the October cold pressing in from the street. Then she stepped forward and hugged me the way she hugs me when something is serious and she is not pretending otherwise. Not performative. Real. "You look good, Dad," she said. "I look 71, I said. She laughed, first real laugh I'd heard in a week. "Come inside, show me everything." We worked at my kitchen table until past midnight. She laid it out with the organized precision of someone who had been building this structure for days. The toxicology report, the legal filings on the conservatorship firm, the financial trail connecting Derek's petition to the estate valuation documents, each page placed deliberately in sequence. Then one more document. "This attorney has done this before," she said, tapping the page. 3 prior conservatorship petitions in Tennessee and Mississippi in the past 6 years. 2 flagged by state elder affairs offices for procedural irregularities. He has a pattern. He finds the families. He coaches them. He waits for the documentation to be thick enough and then he files. Derek didn't design this, Dad. Someone walked him through every step. My son didn't just betray me. My son hired a professional to help him do it efficiently. Thursday morning, we drove to Nashville in the Lexus, 2.5 hours south. Renata navigated from the passenger seat with her laptop open and coffee in the console. The October trees going orange and red along I-40. A father and daughter on an ordinary Thursday morning, which was exactly what it needed to look like. The evaluation was 2 hours and 50 minutes. When I came out, Renata was in the waiting room, perfectly still in the way that means her mind is running at full capacity underneath. She looked up. The specialist stepped into the doorway behind me. He looked at Renata and said, "Without ceremony, your father's cognitive profile is consistent with a man 15 years his junior. Whatever documentation was being assembled would have no medical ground to stand on." I watched 3 things move through my daughter's face in sequence. Relief, then a cold and focused fury, then resolution. She shook his hand, looked at me. "Okay," she said, "now we build the response." Over the following 10 days, that is precisely what Renata Parrish did. The competency evaluation was filed with Shelby County Probate Court, certified and dated. The toxicology report and all physical evidence went to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Elder Abuse Unit. A detective named Sandra Voss was assigned, methodical and thorough in the way that good investigators are methodical. Renata filed a formal complaint with the Tennessee Department of Commerce against Derek's financial advisory license, attaching the conservatorship petition nomming him as proposed financial conservator of my estate. Textbook conflict of interest. She mentioned that last item almost as a footnote while we were cleaning up the kitchen table at midnight. "I filed that one the day I got the lab results back," she said, "before I even called you with the numbers." She stacked the last folder and looked at me calmly. I wanted it in motion before anything else moved. She had filed before she told me what was in the bottles. My daughter. Derek was placed on administrative suspension by his firm pending regulatory review on December 3rd. He didn't know. He was still calling me every few days, warm and attentive, asking how I was feeling, whether I was taking my drops. Every day without fail, I told him, let him believe that. Because here is what my son failed to account for when he stood at his front door on a Sunday in October and pressed 2 bottles of poison into his father's hands with a warm, genuine-looking smile. He forgot who raised me, and he catastrophically underestimated who I had raised. I called Derek on a Monday morning and told him I needed to go over some estate paperwork with the family before year-end, that my financial planner had flagged some items requiring in-person review. I let my voice carry just a trace of the confusion of a man who finds administrative matters a bit much. Derek agreed before I'd even finished the sentence. Of course he did. We settled at 4 o'clock. Renata left my house at noon, 2 stops to make. She didn't explain them and I didn't ask. I arrived at Derek's house at 3:55. dressed carefully the way I dress when something matters. Vanessa answered before I knocked. Leonard, right on time. Come in. Something to drink. Just water, I said. Thank you, Vanessa. Not a flicker. Derek was in the living room with Marcus. Both stood when I entered with the careful, attentive warmth of men who believe they are days away from getting what they have been working toward. Dad. Derek embraced me. Warm, firm, convincing. In a minute, I said. I looked around that living room, the same careful surfaces, the same staging. The last time I had stood here, I was pretending not to know what I had just read on my phone at the kitchen sink. I checked my watch, 3:58, 2 minutes. Derek settled into his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man holding the cards. So, estate paperwork. What did your financial planner flag? I looked at my son across the room, the boy I had driven to his first day of high school, the young man I had helped move into his first apartment, the 43-year-old who had counted 12 drops into a glass for me and smiled. She flagged everything, I said. A small silence. The front door opened. Renata Parrish, walked into her brother's living room. I have replayed that moment many times since. Derek's face lost its confidence in stages, like a power outage moving through a building floor by floor. First the eyes, then the corners of his mouth, then a slight opening of his jaw before some trained instinct closed it. Marcus stared at the carpet. Vanessa made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Renata walked to the center of that room like she owned every inch of it. She set her leather bag on the coffee table. She opened it without hurrying. She placed 3 documents on the table in a line. The first, she said, her voice the temperature of the street outside, is a certified toxicology report from an independent laboratory confirming that both sealed supplement bottles given to my father on October 14th contain concentrated scopolamine significantly above any therapeutic threshold. The lab's written report classifies the finding as consistent with intentional administration. She paused one beat. The second is the conservatorship petition drafted and filed by your legal counsel, signed by Derek Parrish and Marcus Parrish, along with correspondence establishing a preparation timeline beginning in late August. The petition names Derek as primary guardian and financial conservator of my father's estate. She looked up from the documents. The third is a court-certified independent cognitive evaluation conducted last Thursday establishing my father's full legal competency. She let her eyes move from Derek to Vanessa to Marcus. To be precise about what you did, you deliberately administered a controlled substance to a fully competent man. You staged circumstances to manufacture a medical record of decline, and you signed your names to the financial motive for doing so. You didn't make a mistake. You built a plan. Derek stood up. Renata, just everybody calm down. This is. Sit down, Derek. My voice was different. He sat. I want a lawyer. His voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. That is the first intelligent thing you've said since August. Renata looked at me, the smallest nod. I took out my phone and called Detective Sandra Voss. She arrived with 2 other investigators, quiet and methodical. No theater, just the composed efficiency of people who understood that restraint was more devastating than spectacle. Detective Voss introduced herself, showed her credentials, and walked into that living room like she had all the time in the world. Vanessa cried, not the managed, calibrated kind I had seen from her before. Real crying, the architecture of a lie coming down all at once with nothing left underneath to hold the face together. Marcus wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor with his hands still on his knees, and I thought about the boy he had been, my younger brother, 20 years of Sunday dinners and fishing trips, and the particular shorthand that brothers develop over decades of shared history. Derek said nothing while Voss spoke. He looked at the carpet, and I understood from the quality of that silence that he had been coached on exactly what not to say if this moment ever arrived. He had planned for the possibility of being caught. That detail, above everything else, was the one that cost me something I will not get back. When Voss moved toward him with the handcuffs, Derek looked up, not at Renata, at me. "Dad," his voice broke cleanly in half. "Why?" I asked, one word I needed to hear it. The room went completely still. And then my son began to cry in the way that happens when every wall comes down at the same moment and there's nothing left to hold any of it together. "I had a deal that went bad," he said finally. "I owe serious money to people who are not patient about it." He stopped, wiped his face. "Marcus came to me in July. He said there was a way. I said no at first. I said no." He looked down. "Vanessa said it wasn't like we were hurting you. She said you were 71 and you'd end up needing care eventually anyway, so it wasn't really." He couldn't finish it. I looked at Vanessa. She had both hands over her mouth, tears running, not looking at anyone. "You'd end up needing care eventually anyway, so it wasn't really wrong." That was the math my son had done on my life. "Look at me, Derek," I said. He looked. "You sat across from me at that table. You counted 12 drops into a glass your wife had already prepared. You pressed 2 more bottles into my hands at the door and told me to take them every morning. I let that sit between us. That is not a man who got desperate and made one bad choice. That is a plan. You need to own that completely." He was crying too hard to answer. I turned to Detective Voss. "I'm done," I said. Derek Parrish, Vanessa Parrish, and Marcus Parrish were each charged with elder abuse, criminal conspiracy, and assault by chemical means. The attorney who had orchestrated the conservatorship scheme was referred to the state bar and faced his own separate proceedings. Derek's firm finalized his termination the same afternoon the handcuffs went on. When the house was empty, it was just Renata and me. Vanessa had lit candles on the mantel before everything fell apart. They were still burning. This small, surreal domestic detail. I walked to the front window and looked out at Germantown Road in the early October dark. 26 days ago, I had turned into this driveway, genuinely happy about pot roast. Renata came and stood beside me. "Your estate," she said quietly. "I've already filed the irrevocable trust documents. Everything is protected. You retain complete decision-making authority over every cent. This was never about the money for me, Dad. I want you to be absolutely clear on that." "I know that," I said. "I have always known that." She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder, then straightened. "Should we get out of here?" "There's a place on Poplar Avenue," I said. "Best pecan pie in Memphis, and I should know because I bought one last Sunday for people who didn't deserve it." She laughed, full and unguarded. My daughter's laugh, the one I had not heard enough of in 4 years. "Lead the way, old man," she said. I smiled and walked down the steps. The case went to trial the following spring. I sat in that courtroom in my good clothes on sentencing day and listened to a judge speak in the formal language of Tennessee criminal law, and what she said, stripped to its foundation, was this: what was done to Leonard Parrish was not a family matter. It was a crime. I did not feel triumphant walking out of that courthouse. I want to be honest about that because you deserve the honest version. You do not feel triumphant when your son goes to prison. You feel the weight of every year, every phone call, every moment you wish you had seen more clearly and didn't. But underneath that weight, permanent and load-bearing, I felt something else. Clarity. The specific clarity of a man who has finally, completely stopped being lied to. The feeling of a fever breaking. Of setting down something heavy you had carried so long you forgot it was not supposed to be yours. Subscribe to Dad's True Emotions right now. Hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I will see you in the next one.